Hi folks, so today I'm going to be talking about my responses around Karuna, around compassion, what happens when metta meets suffering in the world, in other people. So my experience at the moment is that actually, I am personally not suffering, okay? I'm living at Taraloka. The weather's gorgeous, although by the time you've watched this it may well have changed. But what's happening is I'm looking on the news and seeing quite a lot of suffering out there. So I'm seeing suffering of people who are dying before they might have done. I'm seeing suffering of families who haven't been able to be with people that they love when they were ill and dying. I'm seeing suffering of NHS frontline staff who are working at their limits in some places to care for the sick people. There's a lot of stuff going on. But it's not happening to me. At the moment, it's not happening to me. So in a way, what I'm trying to say is my responses to this scenario, it's not actually any different how I'm working in this area of how I meet suffering in other people in the world. It's no different to last year when I was seeing the UN biodiversity report come out and just feeling incredibly sad about the crash in numbers of different sorts of species, birds, animals, insects, etc. It's no different to when I'm looking at the pictures of Syrian refugees and thinking, I live in a stable country. What must it be like to have to leave and to go to places where you are unwelcome, where there's no provision for you, you don't know where you're going to sleep, you don't know what's going to happen to you. So what I notice is I go in between, so we've got this theory, there's metta, there's me caring about other people, and then I meet suffering in the world and it turns into compassion, where it's just I see that and it's I would not choose that happened. And that's a marvellous theory, okay? It's a marvellous theory. But I tell you what mostly happens for me, unless I'm consciously trying to avoid it, is, so first I do denial, okay? I don't mean I sit down and I pretend I don't know about it, but I do denial by I only pay attention to things that are important to me, like my issues, what I'm going to have for supper, can I buy flour in the supermarket? Are my friends and family okay? And if they are, I don't really want to look any further. I just want to go, okay, we're fine at the moment. And I can feel that as a sort of visceral closing down, I don't want to look. And it's sort of protective. But then when I think, well, actually, I do want to know what's happening. I do want to open up. And then I look at the news, and I don't know, I watch a few little videos or read a few things and stuff. And what happens fairly shortly is that I start feeling quite upset, quite overwhelmed, quite frightened, and a sort of fear around the uncertainty, and it's like this now, and what's going to happen next, and the economics and the finance and the how many people are going to die, and is it going to be me, and is it going to be people I love, and I can end up feeling quite overwhelmed, panicky, and trying to work out how to fix it actually, and then feeling I can't fix it, the government can't fix it, no one can fix it, and that's not compassion. So I think an overwhelmed response goes back a really, really long way for me. So I can remember, this is 2006, and I have come to Taraloka on my first retreat ever. I think maybe I'd been on a Sheffield Sangha weekend, but it was definitely my first longer retreat. and I had only come because my friend had asked me about every week for like 2 months if I'd go with her, and in the end I said, oh, all right then, if you must. And that retreat was, I think it was an open retreat, and it was led by Sadhanandi, and it was themed around Tara and the Brahma Viharas, which I did not know anything about at that point. And not to give you the whole story of the retreat, but like to take us right to the end, there was a question and answer session at the end. And I got a chance to ask the question that had been bothering me all week. And the question was, as soon as I try to go into the 5th stage of the metta bhavana, and I bring to mind all beings, what happens is I just get really overwhelmed. So what should I do? What should I do at that point? And I remember kind of thinking underneath at the time that was quite a good thing, like overwhelm. That meant that I cared. That meant that I cared. And Sadhanandi just sort of, she just sort of looked at me quite quietly, and she just said very, very directly, you don't have enough metta. And I don't actually remember if she said anything else at all, because that is the only part I remember. But I sort of turned a bit of an internal somersault at that point. I was like, oh, I don't have enough metta. Oh, but I thought being overwhelmed meant that I cared. And you could say that I've been pondering that question ever since, which is, how can I open to caring about the limitless realm of beings without just getting overwhelmed and suddenly it's all about me, I don't want it to be this way, I'm upset about this, I don't want the world to be that way, I don't want COVID-19 to be happening, I don't want mass extinctions or Syrian refugees to be happening either, or I don't even want, like, when I talk to my friend on the phone, I don't want her to be feeling miserable. It's pretty simple. So you could say I've been looking for how to respond to that ever since. And I feel actually quite grateful to Sadhanandi that she gave me such a challenging and such a direct answer. You don't have enough metta. And she was right, and she's still right. I still don't have enough metta. So I'm going to go in a couple of different directions about how I manage this, like how I work with this opening out without getting overwhelmed. So I think my first tactic is, so it's like, sometimes I almost end up doing this with my hands while I'm meditating, where it's like I'm trying to hold two things. So one thing is over here, and what I'm trying to hold is my response. And I need to be able to experience that emotional response. I need to be okay with it. I need to not tell myself it's the wrong response and I should be having a different response. And I sort of, like, it needs to wash through me. It's like I need to allow whatever that response is. And like I say, quite often this will be overwhelm or panic. Although sometimes it will be indifference, like actually I'm trying to open up to... I love this phrase, the limitless realm of beings, but say I'm just trying to open up to carers going into people's homes to keep them sustained and safe while COVID-19 is going on. And to start off with, like, I'll just have this sort of overwhelmed response, or it might be indifference actually, like, oh, actually I just don't care. And then, okay, so what does it feel like not to care? What's that like in my body? Or if I start feeling overwhelmed, I get this sort of grip around my diaphragm. What is it like to feel that grip around my diaphragm? And so it's like I'm bringing kindness to my own responses, whatever they are. And actually, if I'm not able to do that, like, nothing else will happen. I can't kind of like pretend that's not happening and try and do compassion over here. So a lot of the time I feel that I'm sort of working in that area of like, oh, I try and let it in, and this comes up, okay, can I be with that? But then at the same time, I'm trying to hold this other side. And the other side is, and what about them? So this side is all about me and my responses. And this side is, and what about them? And I need to just let that be very simple, because as soon as I get into trying to fix it or trying to work out how that suffering of theirs could not happen, well, basically I've lost it. It's all about me again. It's all about how can I avoid that discomfort of having to encounter their suffering. But actually there's something very sort of pure and quite kind of simple that I can let happen on this side if I'm holding my own responses, which is just like, oh, well, if I could choose, I don't have to fix it, I don't have to make it okay for them, but if I could choose, what would I choose for that person? And actually I would never choose suffering for that person, whoever they are, whether or not I know them, whether or not they really annoy me. Actually, there's something very authentic in me which just says, oh no, actually I would choose you didn't suffer. And for me it's really painful that you are suffering. And everything else just gets to be sort of like confusion to kind of, that means that maybe I can push away that painful experience of knowing that people suffer. Yeah. So I do quite a lot of this, trying to hold my response and then find another response that is more pure and is more about the other person. And that can work, that definitely helps. But sometimes I find it's not enough. It's not enough. Something else needs to happen. Because personally, being a bit of a nihilist, where I can go is, it's all dukkha, there's nothing left but suffering. All that happens is people have a terrible time and then they die, and what's the point in that? And that just leaves me in a very, very bleak place, which does not help me, it does not help other people, and it does not lead to me taking any actions to alleviate that suffering. So where I have to go instead is, well, actually, just to say, like Ratnavandana says, and this is a classic response actually, is, oh, well, if you're getting overwhelmed with the suffering, bring in joy, bring to mind the joy in the world. And it's not that I don't think that's a good suggestion, it's just that it doesn't seem to work for me, or not in that moment. So what does work for me in that moment, where I'm losing it, is I bring in Shraddha, and I bring in a sense of faith, a sense of something bigger, I suppose a sense of something bigger than me and my slightly puny amount of metta. It's like I have to open to a sense of metta that is beyond me, beyond limits, and that can hold all the suffering in the situation, both my own suffering as I try to open to it, and the suffering of other people. And so, in this living in the Mandala Brahma Viharas retreat that Ratnavandana and I would be doing this week if it hadn't been for COVID-19, this quality of compassion is associated with the red Buddha of the West, with Amitabha, which is why I wanted to come and sit in Tarika's half-finished Earth Sky Garden, because we have this very, very grounded, serene Amitabha Buddha that's been built into our wall, and it's a rupa I really love actually, and you can see all the lichen that's been growing on it for years as it's sat out here. And so Amitabha, limitless light, and Amitayus, limitless life. And there's something for me about this term, like the deathless. You remember when the Buddha first gets enlightened and then decides to teach, he says, Wide open are the doors of the deathless. Let those who hear show faith. And it's almost like, I don't know that I'm actually going to be able to explain to you what it is about this term, the deathless. But it kind of, what is it that it does? I suppose it's like I was watching a clip of people working on an intensive care unit, and actually I used to be a physiotherapist, and sometimes I used to have to work on intensive care units. Quite a long time ago, but I did. And they're all working to keep people alive. So they're all trying to fight death and keep people alive. And that is a fantastic thing. It's not that I want anyone to die if they could go on to live a full and happy life. It's not that I would, so it's fantastic that they're doing that. And yet, there is something that is beyond that. Because all those people in that intensive care unit, they may not die that day, but they will die, and I will die, and everyone I love will die. And there's something about the deathless which says, it's not that death won't happen, it's more that actually we stop identifying with what dies. Death ceases when we stop identifying with a particular flow of conditions, and that flow of conditions will be born and will die. But actually, if we identify with the flow, if we identify with the river that always changes, that is always made of new water, new atoms, it's the same river, it's a different river. And that is the deathless, and that is what I'm trying to open towards. And you might think, oh, isn't that just heartless? You're just not going to care about people dying. But actually, that's not the case. We've got Amitabha, limitless life, limitless light. And he embodies this love that is beyond my little sort of space-time continuum. Here am I, born in 1974, and it's like, I'm conditioned, I can try and open to other beings, but actually it's like, if it was just up to me and this little consciousness, I am not big enough to hold the level of pain and suffering in the world. I'm just not. So I suppose whether it's like I'm seeing it as, it could be like I'm opening to, I suppose, the collective, like you could think, all of us in the Sangha, in our scattered places, coming together online, some of us living with each other, some of us alone, and all of us in our different ways, trying to open to metta, trying to open our small, fearful minds to something that is much, much more expansive. So I can bring to mind the rest of the Sangha, and kind of like rely on that, like rely on us collectively rather than like just me. And of course it doesn't stop at the Sangha, there's so many people from so many different backgrounds, religious, completely secular, and all of them also doing acts of kindness, doing acts of generosity, doing acts of love, going beyond themselves. So it's like there's this innate quality in life, in what it is to be human, where we do resonate with each other. Unless we're blocked off to it, we do care about each other and other beings. And actually that's something much bigger that I can open to and rely on. And then I can also rely on that force. You could say like metta as a force in the universe, or metta as potential for life in the universe. And of course, this is what all the archetypal Buddhas and Bodhisattvas represent. So whichever you have a connection with, actually that is what they represent. This limitlessness, this deathlessness in the universe. And, it just sounds like La La Land unless you personally have actually experienced this. But actually, a lot of people have, and a lot of people do. And actually, even if you haven't, that doesn't mean you won't tomorrow. But that direct experience of a compassionate force which wants me to grow beyond suffering, that wants me to open into the deathless. And it wants you to open into the deathless as well. And it wants all those people on ventilators and intensive care units to open to the deathless. I don't know, whenever I experience that, so I would probably call that force my Yidam, which is Maitreya, who embodies metta, Maitri. I bring to mind that Dutch story of the little boy who had his finger in the wall of a dike. You know, the dikes are holding back the sea in Holland or wherever, and the little boy saw water pouring through this dike, and he thought, that's gonna break open the wall. That's gonna overwhelm the fields and the farm and drown me. So I'm gonna go and sit there. I'm gonna put my finger in that hole and I'm gonna plug the hole, because otherwise this water will break through. And in the story, the little boy is heroic and he saves his village because he just sits there all day until somebody comes to find him, and then they fix the dike and nobody's drowned and it all ends up happily ever after. But in my version of this, to me it's a bit of a mythic story. It's like my ego is that little boy with the finger in the dike, where it's like, all I have to do is take my finger out of the hole, and actually there is this sense of metta that I can open up to, that as I do, it dissolves my dike, it dissolves my walls that keep back this ocean of metta. And it is scary, because actually if I open to it, I'll have to stop just protecting me and mine. That will have to go. And yet, then I would open to being responsive to the universe. I wouldn't have to keep anything back. I wouldn't have to do this flip-flap between denial, sort of staying small, just concentrating on what's important to me, or when I open up, feeling overwhelmed because, well, what will happen to me? What will happen to me? And of course I can't let that breach in the dike open any. It's got its own pace, and I can't let it happen too quickly, and yet I have to let it happen. I just start wondering if I'm being too intense on camera, but never mind, maybe it just doesn't matter. So when I'm doing the Metta Bhavana and I start feeling overwhelmed, that is what I can rely on in a way. It's like that sense of Amitabha seated on a limitless ocean of metta, and the sun going down behind him, and the wine-dark sea with the path of light reaching towards us. And actually that sense of metta in the universe, that sense of metta as a force or a potential, whether we think of it as like a down-to-earth like potential for us, or whether we think of it as something really other, actually that is something that is protective and it can hold us. And it is certainly what holds me as I make my attempts to open and be present to suffering in the world.